Hello, welcome back. Okay, so I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to get into the text with Their Eyes Are Watching God, but I want to start today just showing you what criticism really looks like. I want to start with this. I'm going to say that it's kind of a claim. Robert Steptoe says that Hurston's curious insistence on having Janie's tell her personal history in and as a literary form told by an omniscient third person rather than by a first person narrator implies that Janie has not really won her voice and self after all. That her author, who is quite likely the omniscient narrating voice, cannot see her way clear to giving Janie her voice outright. When I first read that, I just thought, what? Why? I mean, where would you get that? And then it took a little while to understand. Really, what I do now. When I was younger, I would read criticism, and I would quote that, and I would try to build my thesis around whatever other people said. And now I'm more critical in what they're saying too, because I've read a lot of criticism, and sometimes a cigar is really just a cigar, as Freud of all people would say. But what happens though when you start to look at criticism is you start to get ideas, and you start to think more in terms of possibilities in the text and interpretations and things that you could write about. And so I like this other Thompson. This is the same, she's quoting her, but Thompson wants to resolve the dilemma by exploring the connection made throughout Hurston's use of projection, gender projection, and personification as a way to reflect her voice in a male storytelling tradition while maintaining an authentic folklore approach through her personified images. If that was just an AP claim for an essay, that would be a 9. That would be awesome, because look at what she does here. This is something that you have to learn how to do. Just like in your junior AP class, when you had to identify rhetorical devices, there's an analogy. Well, what is the function of it? And why do I have to do this? Well, because when you actually make your point and write about it, you have to support it. And so this person is actually supporting, I think, actually, I forget the first name. I don't know whether it's to say male or female, but I think it's a male. He's supporting this by the personification, by saying that this is a technique. So I want to flip over to, if you've seen any of the other videos I've made, I kind of do this chart thing when I'm trying to get somewhere. So let's look at this. So whether you agree with the statements or not, it doesn't really matter. What we're trying to do is make an interpretation. So take a keyword from the prompt, which in this case is going to be a moment from youth. Okay. That moment, I think that is going to reveal the novel as a whole, is going to be the point where Janie can't see herself in the picture. And the lady asks her, don't you know your own self? Okay. So this is about, self-discovery. So on the theme side of it, what I really want to get to, no matter what the question asks, if I use this text, I really want to talk about cultural identity, and in this case, self-actualization, which I'll show a chart later on when we get more into the text to show you how she's gone through the steps of Maslow's self-actualization. So, but I have to have a tool here. I have to say something about the figurative language, the technique. So I'm going to use point of view. And it is an interesting point of view because it's not just first person. We get Janie's point of view, But we also have this omniscient author who is, I think, also, now that I've thought about it more, I kind of find myself agreeing that whoever this omniscient author is, she, and I think she is female because I think she leans towards, feminist reading of the story, and she's guiding us to understand. And this, if the story is always about trying to understand, then you have to realize that we do use rhetorical devices. To teach is to tell stories. It's a device. It helps you connect with something else that you don't maybe understand, but you can understand this. Now think about that in terms of what Hurston is trying to do as a writer and why she uses personification. So let's look at the last example. This is the last line of the chapter we just finished. And Nanny says to Janie, I wanted you to look upon yourself. I don't want your feathers always crumbled by folks throwing up things in your face. And I can't die easy thinking maybe the men folks, white or black, is making a spit cup out of you. Have some sympathy for me. Put me down easy, Janie. I'm a cracked plate. So I put in bold the metaphors. There's 3 metaphors and maybe 3 sentences. And this is what I mean by, if English is your second language and it seems very confusing because obviously you have to read it out loud. Like we're not spelling I'm, spelling so an A-H. And phonetically, this is where it actually makes sense, My son is dyslexic, and the teacher wrote me a little note one time saying, FYI, he's reading phonetically. And I was like, yeah, so that's how he was taught. Because for dyslexic kids, that whole reading the chart or whatever, the flashcards, it doesn't work. They would just start guessing. Like, they could say him, and they'll go cat, dog, they'll just go through the list, So he had to read phonetically. And so it does make sense to your ear if you read it out loud. But see how much more she can say by using the metaphors. What does it imply when she says her feathers? This is Janie. What does feathers connote? It connotes, this freedom and free spirit. And that says a lot more than just, I know what kind of person you are. You're such a free-spirited person, blah, blah, blah. This is where you get too wordy. And you want to be exact. And also, Hurston herself said that she was just a very visual person. And that's the way she saw images. So when you talk about Hurston's work, you really have to talk about the images, which is why I think using the technique of personification, if you can, in your essay, would be a really good idea. So we're going to work towards that. And also narration. Probably more likely narration than personification because you don't have it right in front of you. But keep that in mind in a Q2 question. When you're looking at the text, what does it have a lot of? It's got to have some figurative language or they wouldn't have pulled that text. There's no way they would have. You've got to find it and make it significant, like that parable example that I said about, what Jesus, what he was really explaining is the way, in some ways, free will and the way that people receive the Word of God. That is a very difficult concept to try, if you believe it or not, but being able to see it, that's imagery, right? And hear it. So, of course, a spit cup, it's bad enough to be spit on, but to be that spit cup, it really dehumanizes you. And then, of course, explaining herself as a cracked plate says a lot too. Cracked plate is still whole, but it's barely hanging on there, and she is barely hanging on. She's been through a lot, and she's doing everything that she can for Janie. Okay, so what I was thinking of in this is to think about what would be the purpose of Hurston if we were going to go along with this argument that she is limited in a way. How are you going to explain that through her use of metaphoric language and personification? So you think about one of the things that she says about the people who are sitting on the porch. And she says, a mood come alive. The mood comes alive. So that's personification. All right, and they're talking about her when she says it. She says they're words without masters. What do you think she means by that? And so this kind of goes into a power struggle, right? Now let's think about what her situation is. She's a black woman. She doesn't have a lot of people who are going to support her writing, okay? Storytelling is kind of dominated at this point by white males. And, I mean, overall it is. But this is kind of a new way. And she's got to tell her story in a different way to let Janie, a black woman, be the hero of her story. So maybe, what's his name, Steptoe, maybe he's right that Janie can't just tell the story by herself. Just like Hurston can't just do it by herself. She has to use those other elements. And she uses what she's learned from mythology. Really, I see it all the time when I'm reading, because I've read, Homer. I see like the same kind of techniques, almost like that epic simile there. So why do this? Why I wrote it down and now I can't remember why. Oh yeah, okay. So to function as a writer, she wants, remember, the woman's dream is to get to the truth. And so she's trying to tell the truth. Even in her own story, we haven't quite got there yet, but when there's stories about the men talking on the porch and telling stories, and they're all trying to outdo each other, Janie could think of some stories too. But she doesn't have a voice. She can't say that out loud. Even at some point, Joe doesn't even want her on the porch at all. And when he makes his speech, they say, well, let's hear from the mayor's wife. And he says, she doesn't know anything. I didn't marry her for anything like that. She's not for speech making. And Janie has a moment where she goes, that kind of hurt. I never thought about giving a speech, but what if I did? What would be so bad about that if I had something to say? And also, Janie's grandmother makes the point that she always wanted to preach a sermon, but there was no pulpit for her. So if you look at it like from all together of what is she doing as far as trying to get her story across and her voice. Can Janie do it alone? I don't know that she can any more than she can sit on the porch with a bunch of men. And this isn't just, I really don't think this is just happening in that day. I mean, because I grew up with a brother and a lot of guys too. And I always felt pretty insecure speaking out. I have no problem now if I saw those people now. It would be really different. But as a young girl, I always felt kind of inferior, like you're lucky we're letting you sit with us and talk, And I can't imagine if I felt like that in the 80s, what she must have felt. So I do think that he has a point. And there's another thing I want to read that I think really explains this. Nellie McKay suggests, in attempting to cope with the powerlessness and vulnerability of the racial self, blacks have employed language strategies, particularly artifice and concealment, in their relation with white America. May also explain the problems with Dust Tracks on the Road. And Dust Tracks on the Road is her autobiography that um, people say that there's a lot of discrepancies. I haven't done the research, so I can't say what's true and what isn't. But I can say that it does sound like it's exaggerating some things. I mean, there's the storytelling element that sounds very fictional. And, you know, there may be some things that are kind of just like if we were going to make a screenplay, you're thinking about structure. Bohemian Rhapsody just came out, and I was reading an article about this morning about how, you know, there was inconsistencies with the actual story. They were trying to, of course, build emotion and all of that, and that's because, you know, truth doesn't come. Our lives are aren't like story made, even though there's some good stories there. There's not like a really tight structure, and there's certain things that you have to do to build the audience. So that doesn't mean that there's outright lies in it. It just means that they can't tell the story exactly how it happened, or it wouldn't be a movie, it would be a documentary. So I think that's kind of what she's, as a storyteller, in her own story, she is also using those storytelling techniques to make people want to read it and be interested in her voice. And you hear this voice and you're not even really sure if this is truly her, but it's what she feels works. Okay? So I hope I haven't lost you in all of this. I'm kind of going in circles here, I feel like, but I think it's important for you to see what criticism really looks like, because why are we asking you to be able to talk about a piece in terms of how it's written? And so if we go back to just looking at her metaphors, oh, say hi to Shiloh. He's just staring. If we look at like her method and in personification, words without masters, that sounds like a criticism to me. And I think that, and I think that what the point that they're trying to make here is that she can't on her own criticize and say things, maybe not even the same way that people like Richard Wright can, because she is a woman. She, like, you know, Jesus can't go out there and just start telling people what's wrong with you. Like, you're going to be Judas, and this is definitely a Peter right here. No, he's not going to do that. He knows, but he's going to have to show you in a different way. You know, like one of the best parables, of course, is, I think, the prodigal son. But I also love the story of the publican. And, you know, when he's faced with to ask for mercy, the Pharisee says, oh, I'm glad I'm not like this guy, you know, whatever. And the publican just says, have mercy on me. Okay, saying a lot about humility without outright criticizing and saying why. Because she doesn't have the authority. She doesn't have the credentials either. I mean, she has got her way all through her life, it seems, based on her guts. And yes, she's gifted and people recognize that, but she has a personality that really helps. Like, this would have been someone who didn't need to read How to Win Friends and Influence People. She knew the secret. At the same time, though, is she going to be taken seriously? And obviously she did have trouble with that, or she wouldn't have been, her work wouldn't have just fell into obscurity for so many years. And how many years later did it take for someone like Alice Walker to come in and actually say, you know what, This is up there with everything else that we're reading. Why isn't it in the canon? And so I think even that kind of proves the point that Janie doesn't have her own authority of her story. But the personification, I think, what you can do with that is talk about how you can say much more without outright offending people. And that's kind of with the story, just like when I begin with my students, it's not like I can't start off just being, critical of them, or, even if I know they're going to be late, I have to say, I know that's going to happen, and sometimes you're going to have a really good excuse. But other times, you've cried wolf too many times. And I don't have to call them outright stupid or lazy for not doing things on time. I would never do that. But just by saying, even I've said it a few times to parents, and that's the end of it. Because that is what tells the story, and I think you forget about who's telling the story when the story and the images kind of speak for themselves. But she's really trying to get people to take Janie as a hero seriously as well.